Yeah, baby. Sometimes reverbs can tend to sound a bit dull, a bit too clean. And in those sort of situations, you're probably going to process that reverb sound with something else, like put some modulation after it, or some overdrive. And oftentimes I'm sort of left wanting more character, wanting more grit on my reverb. And this unit certainly gives that. So if you are looking for a reverb that is sort of more general purpose, this probably isn't going to be your number one choice. Having said that, you can absolutely get some more neutral reverb tones out of it, but you really don't have much room to sort of wiggle with. So I briefly want to touch on the build quality of this unit. I am very, very happy with the quality of it. The housing is metal, and it's feels extremely sturdy and well put together. The switch feels really nice. It's not really resisting at all. It seems to flow pretty nicely. The knobs feel nice. Now, as we all know, you have to have nice feeling knobs, otherwise no one's going to take you seriously. It seems very well put together altogether. The switch has a bit of a sort of a wiggle to it, but it overall feels very very sturdy. Now, build quality of this level is to be expected when the price tag is what it is. That is really the one of the best upsides about boutique pedals. Although they cost quite a bit, you do get that quality. Something like the Lo-Fi Junkie as well. The same thing. It is just feels like a solid piece of metal, a solid piece of equipment. So that's something I do appreciate a lot. So nothing to complain about that. So let's move on to the sound of it. Now, this box is very full of character. So if you want to do something more subtle, you can absolutely do that. I find that there's really not much room for that. So they're subtle, and then it quickly becomes quite flavorful. So we have 3 different controls here and a switch. Firstly, you have volume, which is a great addition to have on a reverb pedal. So many times I wish I could simply tuck in the volume of my reverb before I send it to something like a saturation device or just the preamp, just to make my gain staging a bit better, and so that I don't blow up anything or that I can drive different effects after the reverb a bit better. So that's a huge plus for me. The only downside, and ultimately I think this is the only downside of this pedal, is that it has a crazy amount of volume. This is, especially when you start to crank up the altitude and the verb, the volume quickly gets out of hand. And this is something I've seen and heard a lot of other people say, that it's simply crazy loud, like so loud that it doesn't make any sense. And as you can see, if I have these cranked up here, my volume needs to be all the way down here to make it usable. Now this is pretty much, it's sort of around line level now, but I'm really close to the minimum volume setting. So if I adjust it only a tiny bit, there's a huge drop in volume. And I wish there was more of a moderate control spectrum for that, so that you could actually dial in the perfect amount of output out of this device. Now, having said that, it's better to have a volume control like that than not having one at all. But I struggle to understand why it has so much goddamn volume, because it does get so loud. I mean, if you dial down the altitude, then you can go high, pretty far up high. So I do get it, but there's such a drastic difference between the two that in a studio environment, it's not that big of an issue. But live, if you were to jump between the two, it's a bit of a hassle. Now, I don't know anything about the engineering of this unit, so maybe there's no better way of doing that. But certainly it would be nice to have a bit more, leeway, a bit more wiggle room down here, so that the tiniest movement wouldn't essentially drop out your sound altogether. Because that is really the amount of that's the amount of room I have between making it line level or not having a sound. So let's keep it at the bright setting, and I'm playing a Rhodes here. Just going to try and get a level really quickly. And if we introduce the reverb to the sound, so as you can hear, it's pretty subtle, but it's already breaking up a bit. There's just a tad bit of overdrive on the reverb. So if we turn it down just a bit, so it's a clean sound, but there's that tiny bit of breaking up. So if we increase the reverb, this is what's going to happen. Let's try that same thing with the darker setting. So as you can hear, you have those two different tone options. When you're using just the reverb function, you can do these sort of more mellow reverb soundscapes. There is already a distinct character there. But you can absolutely do the subtle thing. But I don't think this unit is about the subtle, and it really shines when you actually start pushing this knob here. So I believe it's what they call the altitude, and essentially it's gain for your reverb sound. Now, what I've found is that the altitude and the verb control, they play together a lot. So there is no sort of one logical, linear way of working with them, and it greatly depends on the sound source that you have going on. So this sounds very different for guitars and synths and Rhodes. So you really do need to dig in to find the right tone. And I love that, because once you do have settings very clearly laid out, it's likely that you're gonna spend more time trying to think about it in a logical fashion rather than a creative one. So let's start pushing the altitude. So very quickly, I've only gone up to 5 out of 30, and it's already changing a lot. Pull down the verb a bit. This is something I personally love. I love gritty, noisy tones. And to be able to add that to your reverb, not only in a sort of obvious, glued on way, but it's sort of a very interactive and intuitive way. It's really nice, and it sounds really good. I'd struggle to get a sound that good with a reverb and an overdrive. So this sounds absolutely wonderful. I mean, just playing one note gives you so much character. The beautiful thing about it is that everything you feed it makes it react differently. There is no one linear way you're going to be using this device. One of the main things I love about this unit is that it really makes you react to it rather than the other way around. Usually you have an idea and you want the reverb to do what you're thinking of doing, but this tells you no, and it says, this is what I'm doing. And then you need to react to what it's doing. And I find that to take you down a very different creative path, and I think that is certainly a refreshing aspect, because oftentimes you simply think, well, I'm going to throw some reverb on it. This is what it needs to sound like, and that can lead you down a road that gives you sort of flat creative results. And with this, you have no absolute certainty of where that road goes. Now, having said that, absolutely you can tune sounds in such a way that you're getting what you're thinking of doing, but it's not going to be as straightforward, because this is gonna fight back a bit, and it's going to tell its own part of the story. Now, a lot of people are going to hate this unit for that reason, and a lot of people are going to love it for that reason. And I certainly look for creative tools that can take me to unknown waters. And I look for things that react to the sound I'm feeding them in uniquely interesting ways. Because you sometimes you do want to be thrown off. You want to hear something you didn't expect, because that lights up your brain differently, and then you need to react to what you're hearing. And this is certainly one of those tools, and that's why it seems or it feels more like an actual instrument instead of just being a pedal. It's kind of like you have to let go, but you can also trust it to give you something musical. Now, granted, you do need to be a bit of a fan of overdriven, noisy sounds. But if you are, then this is really a wonderland of those sort of things. I was very excited about the Dark Star setting, and I still am. But I was sort of skeptical about the bright setting, because a lot of the demos I heard with guitars made it sound a bit too bright, a bit too harsh. Certainly not as harsh as some of the other similar pedals out there compared to this. But as I played the Rhodes and the synthesizer with the bright setting, it actually, in many cases, works absolutely wonderfully, and even better than the Dark Star setting. So there's something to the bright setting where it has this gentle but realistic sounding shimmer. If you listen to a lot of other pedals with the shimmer setting, they sound a bit too harsh and artificial, and sort of it's hard to describe, but this sounds quite natural, and it depends on what you're feeding it. And a lot of the guitar tones that people use tend to be a bit too harsh, in my opinion. Of course, that's personal taste and depends on the musical style as well. But when you're feeding these sort of more gentle, more controlled tones, the bright setting can really nicely sort of expand your upper harmonics and create that different, distinct high end for that reverb. So although I was super excited about the Dark Star setting because it does get really dark and gritty when you drive this pedal, the bright setting works amazingly well with synthesizers and other keyboards. I've seen a few people complain about the noise on this device. I have no issues with it. I've certainly worked with pedals that are a lot noisier, and of course some pedals simply just tend to be and are, and there's very little you can do about it from an engineering point of view. I don't find this to be noisy at all. I mean, the volume's at full. You can hear that now. Basically, the verb is at max. The gain is at max and the volume is halfway up. So I think that might be more of a guitar issue, because you have your amp, you probably have a bunch of other effect pedals going, overdrive, distortion. So I can see that the noise might add up, and depending on what style of music you're writing or working on, it certainly can get noisy. But I was super surprised by how small of an issue that was. I don't think I'm going to have any issues with the noise of it. I was slightly concerned because a few people had said that it's super noisy, but it's certainly noisy in the sense of the artifacts and the particles it creates when you're really driving it. But that's not problematic noise. That's creative noise. So I don't find that to be a big issue. Maybe it's more of an issue if you're a guitar player, if you have a bunch of overdrives and distortions prior to it, and then you drive it through an amp, then I can see that those might stack up. So the build quality is excellent. I love the look of it, the whole retro vibe. The controls are different, they're intuitive, and most importantly, they feel musical, that I'm actually making musical decisions instead of looking at how much I'm dampening my reverb or adding feedback. And I love the noisy, gritty, dirty sound of it, and the fact that it very much reacts to my playing, and I need to react to what it's doing. And that's why I'm going to give it 4.5 stars out of 5. It's really an excellent unit, and if they could figure out a different way of adjusting the volume for that would be awesome. But like I said, there is a volume control, which is amazing. So if you're looking for a lo-fi, gritty reverb that has a ton of character and really in its own right is an instrument of its own, then I do strongly recommend you check it out. Finished.